The sun was starting to dip below the horizon as I drove down the lonely Kansas backcountry road. My eyes strained against the fading light when I noticed a small figure hobbling along the shoulder up ahead. As I got closer, I realized it was a young boy, no more than 8 or 9 years old. He was barefoot, clothes tattered and stained with dirt and what looked like dried blood. Without a second thought, I pulled over. "Hey there, son, you all right?" I called out as I lowered the passenger window. The boy turned towards me, his face gaunt and eyes hollow. "But please, mister, I need help." My heart broke for the poor kid. Whoever his parents were, they must have been worried sick. "It's okay now, you're safe," I reassured him as I hopped out to help him into the truck. Once he was settled into the front bench, I reached into the back seat and grabbed an old sweatshirt to drape over his skinny shoulders. We drove in silence for a few miles before the boy finally spoke up. "My name's Timmy. Thank you for stopping, mister." "Well, it's nice to meet you, Timmy. I'm Timothy. Just let me know if you need anything. We'll get you somewhere safe and sound." I gave him a warm smile, trying to put him at ease, but his empty eyes just stared back at me, unblinking. About 20 minutes down the road, Timmy suddenly perked up. "Stop the truck!" he screamed at the top of his lungs, making me jump. I barely had time to hit the brakes before the boy flung himself from the still-moving vehicle, bailing out onto the cracked asphalt. I watched in horror from the side mirror as he scrambled up and sprinted towards a rusted old abandoned pickup truck parked in a field on the roadside. My heart pounded as I threw the truck into park and ran after him as fast as my old legs could muster. By the time I reached the field, Timmy had already pried open the driver's side door and was rummaging frantically inside. "Timmy, stop! What are you doing?" I hollered in panic and confusion. That's when he turned to face me, his haunting eyes brimming with psychotic malice. In his tiny hands was none other than a bloody hunting knife, glinting in the fading sunlight. I felt my blood run cold as a little Timmy aimed the wicked hunting knife right at me, his small frame trembling with unbridled rage. In that moment, I realized the gravity of the situation. This was no helpless child, but a deeply disturbed and dangerous individual. "You shouldn't have picked me up, old man," Timmy hissed through clenched teeth. "Now you've got to pay." Before I could react, he charged at me with the knife raised high. By some miracle, I dodged out of the way just as the blade came slashing down, grazing my shoulder. White-hot pain seared through me as I scrambled backwards, my heart pounding like a jackhammer. Timmy pursued me relentlessly, slashing and stabbing with that cursed blade as I desperately tried to create distance between us. Suddenly, I felt the earth give way beneath my feet as I tumbled backwards down a shallow embankment, hitting the ground hard. Stars exploded across my vision as the wind was knocked clear from my lungs. When I could finally draw breath again, I looked up to see Timmy standing above me, framed against the burning orange sky. He glared down with those soulless black pits, gripping the blood-smeared knife as he contemplated how to end me. In that endless moment, my life quite literally flashed before my eyes. But then, a flicker of movement in the distance caught Timmy's eye, the sound of an approaching vehicle. With one last haunting glare, he turned and scampered off, vanishing into the tall prairie grass like a ghost. I laid there for what felt like an eternity, battered and petrified, until the flashing lights of a police cruiser finally appeared. As the officers helped me to my feet and began questioning me, I barely muttered a word, unable to properly process what I had just experienced. In the days and weeks that followed, they conducted an extensive search, but never found any trace of the boy known as Timmy. The blood on that knife was my own. Try as I might, I could never convince them, or even myself, that the encounter was anything more than the delirious ramblings of an old man's mind unraveling. I still have horrific nightmares of those soulless black eyes and that sadistic smile. I try to rationalize it all, but deep down, I know what I saw was pure, unadulterated evil given human form. I truly stared into the abyss that day, and I'll never be the same. I should have trusted my instincts and driven right past them, but there was something about the two young women stranded on the desolate country road that plucked at my conscience. They looked so helpless, stuck out here alone at night with the nearest town over 20 miles away. Maybe it was the fatherly side of me that couldn't just abandon them like that. Whatever stupid sentimentality it was, it ended up being the worst decision of my life. "You ladies need a ride?" I called out as I pulled over. They scrambled over to my truck, shooting me identical relieved smiles that made my heart ache. "These poor kids," the taller blonde one gushed as they climbed into the cab. "I'm Melanie, and this is Susan." "I'm Wilford. No problem at all, just happy I could help out." We made small talk as I merged back onto the 2-lane blacktop, cutting through the vast farmland and thick woods of rural Pennsylvania. Their warm, youthful laughter filled the cab as they regaled me with stories from their road trip across the country. They were just a couple of bright-eyed 20-somethings out exploring the world. Listening to them chattering excitedly about all the freedom and possibilities that lay ahead, I was filled with a melancholic pang, remembering those long-gone days when the future seemed to stretch out infinitely before me. After about 20 minutes, Melanie piped up from the back seat. "Hey, I've got to use the bathroom really quick. Can you pull over up ahead?" I obliged and pulled off onto the shoulder. Melanie jumped out and scurried around to the tree line at the edge of the road. As I waited for her to return, Susan shifted closer to me in the cab. "You've been so incredibly nice to us," she said in a soft voice. Her hand gave my thigh a gentle squeeze, and I felt the blood drain from my face as her touch quickly became more insistent, more predatory. "We'll make sure you get rewarded." My heart pounded as her wandering hand crept higher. This couldn't be happening. Where the hell was Melanie? I finally snapped out of my frozen shock long enough to shove Susan's hand away. "What the hell are you playing at?" I snarled. "Just get out of my truck." Susan's once innocent facade had been replaced by a twisted leer as she leaned in close, her hot, rancid breath washing over my face. "Or what, old man? You gonna make me?" The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as a blood-curdling scream suddenly shattered the tense silence. I whipped my head around to see Melanie staggering back toward the road, her blouse ripped open as she fought off the hulking, disheveled figure of a man. "He just came out of nowhere," Melanie wailed as the brute backhanded her viciously across the face. My stomach turned to ice as he dragged her kicking and screaming into the tree line. I moved to go after them, but Susan seized a fistful of my hair and violently slammed my face into the dashboard. Stunned and dazed, I could only watch in horror as a second man emerged from the darkness to join in Melanie's brutal assault. "Nuh-uh, you're my reward tonight," Susan purred in my ear as she straddled my lap, pinning me against the seat. The truck filled with the anguished cries of Melanie being beaten and violated in the woods just feet away. Mercifully, the sounds eventually subsided to eerie silence, leaving only Melanie's tortured whimpers. I'll never forget the crushing weight of helplessness and despair as Susan had her way with me in the cab of my truck, forced to listen to the aftermath of Melanie's suffering so close by. I was paralyzed, praying only for the nightmare to end. When it was finally over, Susan and her accomplice vanished back into the night, leaving me alone, beaten and violated. Pulling myself together, I mustered what little strength I had to search for Melanie. I found her crumpled in the brush, battered and stripped and robbed of all innocence. I'll never forget the ghostly hollow stare in her vacant eyes. Part of me died out there in those dark woods that night. My life hasn't been the same since. It was a little after midnight, and the road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly into the inky blackness. The beams of my headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the thick trees lining the deserted highway. I had been driving for hours, trying to make it home before sunrise, after visiting my parents a few states over. That's when I saw her, a solitary figure standing on the shoulder up ahead, thumb outstretched. As I approached, I could make out the slim form of a young woman, her face mostly obscured by the hood of her jacket. Something about the situation felt off, but I couldn't just leave her out here alone in the dead of night. I tapped the brakes and pulled over. "You need a ride?" I called out as she approached the passenger side door. She gave a slight nod and climbed in without a word. Up close, I could see her face was partially hidden beneath stringy strands of greasy blonde hair. Her pale blue eyes were sunken and brimming with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "I'm Robert. What's your name?" I asked as I merged back onto the empty road. "Julie," she mumbled, her voice little more than a hoarse whisper. An uncomfortable silence hung heavy in the air. I stole a sidelong glance at Julie. She was staring blankly out the window, seemingly oblivious to my presence. "So, where am I taking you, Julie?" No response. Just that same eerie 1,000-yard stare. The hairs on the back of my neck began to rise. This situation was getting weirder by the second. I briefly considered pulling over and asking her to get out, but immediately dismissed the idea. I couldn't abandon this strange, vulnerable girl out here alone at night, no matter how unsettling she might be. The miles slowly ticked by in tense silence, the only sound the rhythmic rumble of tires on pavement. I tried making small talk a few more times, offering minimal details about where I was traveling from, but Julie remained, an ominous, silent presence beside me. Then I noticed something in my rearview mirror that made my blood freeze. A pair of headlights in the distance behind us, gradually growing closer. The first thought that shot through my panicked mind was that I was being followed, but the lights seemed to be traveling at a normal speed, not gaining on us. Still, an icy chill crept down my spine as the headlights drew nearer. Illuminated in their glow, I could now see Julie's pale, hollow face contorted in a twisted grin, her cracked lips parted to reveal cracked, darkly stained teeth. She started giggling then, a low, gurgling sound like death rattles. I watched in abject horror as her bony fingers crept across the dashboard before wrapping tightly around the steering wheel. She yanked it hard to the left, and we veered off the road, skidding wildly across the dirt shoulder as trees rushed up to meet us. I'll never forget that sickening crunch of twisting metal and shattering glass as we slammed into an unyielding oak trunk. The impact blasted the breath from my lungs and everything went black. When I finally came to, my face was sticky with the warm trickle of blood from a gash on my forehead. Every breath sent piercing jolts of agony through my shattered ribcage, but nothing could have prepared me for the horror I saw illuminated in the glare of those oncoming headlights. Julie, contorted and motionless in the seat beside me, her skull violently caved in from the impact. Bits of skull and brain matter spattered across the remains of the windshield. I'll never be able to unsee that nightmarish vision, or purge the sick realization that Julie wasn't just some random hitchhiker. She was the Reaper herself, beckoning me into the dark embrace of death's icy void. By some miracle, the other driver was able to pull me from the wreckage, but a part of me will be forever trapped in the wreckage of that night, wishing I had never stopped to pick up Julie